Right. Very good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's class. It's a very important session when it comes to handling reading comprehension. When it comes to getting familiar with different question types and different uh, things that you can expect when it comes to reading comprehension portion of the exam. And we all know that reading comprehension carries a lot of weightage, right? You might just end up attempting at least four passages when it comes to the exam on the 29th, right? So I just want to take you through anything and everything that you can expect when it comes to the reading comprehension portion of the exams. What are the kind of questions, right? General questions, specific question, decoy questions, right? Everything that you can expect when it comes to the questions pertaining to this portion of the exam, as well as how best to tackle them, right? What is it that you can do to maneuver yourself uh, through the passage, right? What is it that you can do when it comes to reading comprehension that kind of shortens the time that you're spending on these passages, right? So that is what I'll be covering throughout the lesson today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining in. Allow me to quickly give you an introduction of the Unacademy platform before I delve into all that, though. Unacademy is perhaps India's largest learning platform today when it comes to preparing for any and every competitive exam. This YouTube channel is particularly for management exams such as your CAT, GMAT, NMAT, ZAT, and the likes. I am Prankur Arora. I am going to be taking you on this journey of learning, wherein I'll be, you know, essentially taking care of the verbal ability as well as the reading comprehension portions of these exams. Um, I've been a trainer, I've been a coach, I've been in the learning industry for a better part of the last couple of years. I've even consulted with various organizations such as ITC, Marico, Interglobe, Becton Dickinson, and the likes. I'm also a published author. Wrote a book called "It's Not Funny." Got published a couple of years back. It's that the book is a work of satirical fiction, right? So if you're fond of satire, if you're fond of fiction, do check it out. It was positively reviewed by the likes of Papa CJ Biswapati Sarkar, right? I also hold advanced certifications in facilitation from an American organization called Leadership Management International. LMI is perhaps the world's largest organization working in the space of transformational leadership. And I co founded the startup called Thought Sutra. Thought Sutra is essentially an endeavor to kind of better the ecosystem of the creative arts, right? So if you've got a creative bone in you, that's something that you must check out. uh, so yeah, that's pretty much about me. Welcome aboard this journey of learning. There are quite a lot of features that add to the Unacademy pedagogy. Some of those features include giving you access to daily live classes wherein all kinds of interaction between the educator and the learners happens in real time. We conduct regular tests and quizzes in order to help you prepare amazingly well for these exams, in order to help you get a lot of perspective about where you lie in your learning journey. There are quite a lot of courses running on the platform. All of these courses are structured and prepared by subject matter experts, and with one subscription, you get access to anything and everything. As I was saying, there are quite a lot of educators. All of these educators are highly credible people who, over the years, have mentored aspirants successfully into various top tier management institutions. We regularly conduct live classes, and you can start learning from all these educators for free before deciding whether you want to uh, avail the key benefits that come along with subscription to the platform or not. New batches, new courses, they keep on going live. Language is never a barrier either. We've got educators who teach in vernacular languages as well. So if you're not as comfortable with English, we've got educators who are teaching in regional languages as well. And a really cool thing about the platform is that you design your own schedule. You decide what are the kind of courses you want to enroll into, who are the educators you want to be learning from. All that ownership is on you, right? And as I was saying, every interaction happens in real time. Even the question answers, they are conducted in a very interesting manner. right? They're conducted in the form of live polls, right? So you can participate in these live polls, and it's another adrenaline rush altogether, because then you're competing for a place on the leaderboard, right? For example, if we've got 50 people taking the class, all 50 of them are, basically competing with each other to feature on the leaderboard, right? And when we conduct these tests and quizzes, the onus is to essentially give you in-depth insights, to give you, you know, data, to give you evidence, such as what is the time that you're spending on every para jumbles question versus the time that you're spending, say, on a para completion or a para summary question, right? So that will give you a lot of perspective, that will help you do some course correction in your learning journey if need be. And you'll also see that I'll be scribbling a lot of stuff on the class notes today. So all these class notes are made available to you once you subscribe to the platform. And talking of subscription, these are the various models. You can clearly see that as the time period of the subscription increases, the cost of the subscription per month goes down dramatically, right? So if you're preparing for 2021, I would highly recommend at least a 6 month or a 12-month journey, right? And therein you can clearly see that you get a lot of gestation period to develop the comfort level with the subject matter, right? And if you use my name Prankur, you'll get an extra 10% off on any of the subscriptions that you're going to go for, right? Having said that, let's begin with the uh, theme for the day. So read this paragraph. This is the first paragraph of a longish reading comprehension. Paragraph by paragraph, we'll cover the comprehension, and the idea here is that with every paragraph, we'll summarize it, right? We'll summarize what the paragraph is about. In that, what is the subject of the paragraph and what is the main idea of the paragraph? These are two things that we really need to take care of before we move on to the next one, right? As I said, we we will summarize every paragraph. What is the subject and what is the main point? Subject is basically what is the paragraph about or who is the paragraph about. Main point is why is the author talking about them or how is the author talking about them, right? So we'll summarize every paragraph before moving on to the next one, right? And we'll look at how we can do it really well, right? The idea is to do this summary really well so that we don't have to keep on revisiting the paragraphs again and again. Right. So let's go through this. It comes as no surprise that there is little consensus among economists who study the prospects for the new European Central Bank. Some are overwhelmingly enthusiastic about the ECB's potential to eliminate exchange rate currency fluctuations among its 11 member economies, while others are convinced that cultural differences and inevitable squabbles over monetary policy doom the central bank to failure. So, what or who is the paragraph about? It is about the ECB, right? ECB is basically the subject of the paragraph. And what is the main point, right? It's very important to boil down to the main point. Main point here is that, right, look at this. Some are overwhelmingly enthusiastic about the ECB's potential, while others are convinced that cultural differences and inevitable squabbles over monetary policy doom the central bank to failure. So, the subject is the European Central Bank, and the main idea essentially is that it could. There are two things that could happen. Two things that could happen to the ECB. Those two things are either uh, it'll be successful, right? Either it'll be a success, either it'll be a success, right? Or what's the other? right? Or it could be a flop, or it could be either it will be a success or a flop. There are two things that could happen to the European Central Bank. The two things are either it will be successful or it could be a flop. This is basically the summary of the first paragraph. Let's move on to the next one now. Similarly, you have to essentially create those summaries. Again, I need the subject, right? And I need the main idea. Alright, let's read this. The pessimists have a valid point. The ECB's primary goal, as specified by the Maastricht Treaty, is to bring about price stability within its area of sovereignty. This stability, however, is predicated on reducing the current incongruity of prices throughout the region. Currently, though, there are too many cultural and financial variables that prevent prices from coming into alignment anytime soon. So, what is so look at the first line itself. Look at the first line itself. The pessimists have a valid point. Now, here the author is expressing his point that the pessimists have a valid point. This is not, uh, basically the comprehension's uh, point of view. This is the author's point of view. This is not the conclusion. This is what the author is trying to say, that the pessimists seem to have a valid point. And the author then goes on to explain it, that the primary goal, as specified by a treaty, is to bring about price stability. The stability, however, is predicated. Now the author is saying what the stability currently hangs upon, right? So the author is essentially, the subject remains the same. We are still talking about the ECB. But what is the main idea? The main idea is that the author is saying that it will probably fail. Now, this is the author's point of view. The main idea is author's POV, author's POV बोले तो point of view, author's POV, that it will fail, right? The author's POV that it will fail. Why does the author think that it will fail? Because the author says that it will probably be impossible to stabilize prices throughout Europe. The countries in Europe are very different. Currently, though, there are too many cultural and financial variables that prevent prices from coming into alignment anytime soon. So the author is saying that the countries are very different, so probably stability just might not happen, right? So that's the subject and the main idea. Let's move on to the third paragraph now. Alright, let's read this now. For a start, the prices of many products sold in Europe already vary from country to country by large margins. So now the author is trying to give us examples as to how these countries are different and how prices vary. The average cost of a pair of blue jeans is 34% higher in Germany than it is in Italy. Some reasons for this can be remedied through legislation. If Germany were to repeal its law prohibiting supermarkets from stocking aspirin on their shelves, for example, aspirin prices might come in line with the rest of the Europe as for the rest of the European Union. This was a typo. But most price differentials derive from seemingly immutable standards of living. Personal incomes in Spain and Portugal are well below the European average, as they've been for decades. Thus, prices stay lower to accommodate weaker buying power. And since Scandinavian countries show no sign of adopting the high demand for coffee products that exists in France and Italy, coffee prices will remain much higher in southern Europe than in the north. So what is the purpose of this paragraph? What is the author trying to get at? Right, there are lots of examples in this paragraph as to how the countries are different. Right, so basically when we look at the subject and the main point, what is the subject? The subject is basically examples. The subject is examples of price differentials. And what is the main idea? Main idea is that these examples support the point expressed in the previous paragraph. What was expressed in the previous paragraph? The main idea of the previous paragraph was that the author's POV that it will fail. The previous paragraph was telling us that the countries, the countries in Europe, the countries in Europe are very different. Right, the main idea was that the countries in Europe are very different. Right, so main idea is basically support for para 2. Right, there are too many examples that essentially support everything that we mentioned in the previous paragraph. Right, let's move on to the third paragraph now. Sorry, the fourth paragraph now. Okay, let's read this. Until now, Europe's different currencies have done well to divert consumers' attention from these price differentials. But now that Europe has adopted its one currency, the euro, Europeans are more likely to seek out the best price regardless of geography. This could mean depressed localized economies of scale. Many countries will not recover from this situation in the short term. Right? So if you look at it, the main idea of this paragraph is that it is expressing even more problems. Right, the main idea is that there are more problems. What are those more problems? Right, what are those more problems? The more problems is that until now the different currencies have done well to divert consumer attention from price differentials. For example, you go to London, you have pound. Right, you go to Paris, you've got francs, right? So different currencies, different price differential. So people were not bothered about it. But now Europe has its one currency, which is euro, right? The euro. Now they are saying Europeans are more likely to seek out best price regardless of geography. So be it London, be it Paris, now they are going to deal in euro and they want the best price. This could mean depressed localized economies of scale. Many countries will not recover from the situation in the long term. So now they are saying more problems because of euro, which is the new currency, which is the new money, right? This is what the main point of this paragraph is. Let's move on to the next one. This is basically the concluding paragraph of the comprehension, the fifth paragraph. All right, let's look at what it is saying. Fortunately for the ECB's architects, there are two extraordinary financial models to study and replicate. Number one, the German Bundesbank and America's Federal, and number two, America's Federal Reserve Board. Each country within the European Union, regardless of its population or the size of its GDP, will be represented equally in the ECB's governing council, which will dictate the policies that the various national central banks will implement. As long as the lines of communication remain open and the country representatives keep an open mind toward what may become a radical overhaul within European commerce, the euro and the ECB have a fighting chance to survive. Now, when you look at this paragraph, this concluding paragraph, there is a very different tone, right? This paragraph begins with fortunately, right? Thus far in the entire comprehension, the author was kind of representing or coming from a very negative viewpoint, right? The author was pessimistic. The second paragraph itself began with a statement that there is valid concern for pessimism, that the pessimism is valid. And the final paragraph is beginning with fortunately, right? So, what is the main idea here? What is the author trying to tell us in this paragraph? The main idea essentially is that the author is saying, one is the author is making a few positive comments about the ECB, right? The author is saying that as long as lines of communication remain open and they approach it with open mind, there can be a radical overhaul within European commerce. ECB and Euro have a fighting chance, right? So positive points, right? Positive points is the main idea of this paragraph. Uh, and then the author gave us two banks to emulate, saying that uh, that there could be success. There could be success. There could be success. Though the author says that it will be tough, right? The author says it will be tough. It will be tough, but there could be success. This is what the author is telling us, right? The author says it will be tough, but that it could be successful. Now let me open a blank slide to basically uh, take you through a few more points before we begin with the questions. Just give me a moment. Right. Now, if you look at, the overall picture, what is the, sorry, what is the, what do you call it? What is the overall idea here? What is the overall idea of the paragraph? Right? That there is ECB. We know for a fact there is ECB. There's new currency, right? New currency is euro, right? So this paragraph is basically the paragraph was basically written or authored when the euro for the first time came into the market, right? We are talking about ECB, we are talking about euro, we are talking about how there are many challenges. If you just browse through your summaries, right, you will basically be able to thread it. There are many challenges, right? Uh, and then the author says that finally the author says, but success still possible. Success still possible. This is the thread of the comprehension. What are the kind of challenges the author talked about? Mainly, they were about how diverse the countries are. Diverse countries, right? So this is the overall idea of the passage. Overall idea of the comprehension. Now, I wanted to basically discuss how. See, this is how you map your passages. This is how you map your comprehension. You move from what the subject is. Subject was mainly ECB and the new currency. But what was the flow? What was the general structure of the passage? We talked about challenges. We talked about challenges coming basically because of diverse countries. And finally, we still said that success is possible, right? This is the main idea, the main picture of the entire passage, not just every paragraph but the entire passage. Now there are quite a lot of wait uh, yeah, there are quite a lot of questions that you can come across. One type of question that you can come across when it comes to such passages are, general questions. Right, what are general questions? General questions are questions like, what is the primary purpose? What is the primary purpose of the passage? Right, what is the central idea? Now these are different questions. Primary purpose is basically, why did the author write this? Central idea is, what is the passage about? Right, these are different. So primary purpose, central idea. Then general questions can be about tone. What is the tone of the passage? Right, general question can be about the framework or the structure of the passage. Right, so these are some of the examples of general questions that you can essentially come across, right? But if you've summarized every paragraph properly and you've made accurate notes, you should be able to tackle these general questions without any difficulty, right? Because the map of the entire comprehension is already in your head, right? So that is essentially it. Let's look at the first general question. The first general question is, what is the primary purpose of the passage? Right, the first general question is, what is the primary purpose of the passage? Right, look at all the answer options. Right, take your time, take 60 seconds, and then we'll discuss it. Sorry. Right. I hope you've arrived at your answer option by now. Right. So the first question is basically the primary purpose of the passage. Now, if we were to look at the summary that we made, we'll be able to, basically etch it out, right? Uh, let's first look at the options that we can totally get rid of right away. Look at option B. Right, assert that the European countries that have not yet embraced the euro are destined to do so before too long. Right, because see, there's no mention about whether countries should accept the euro or not accept the euro. Right, there was no such mention in the passage. That is not why the author wrote it. Again, remember, primary purpose primary purpose is essentially, wait, right, primary purpose is essentially, why did uh, the author write it? Why did the author write the passage? That is basically the primary purpose, right? So we eliminated option B because there was no mention about that, right? Uh, Look at A. Compare the ECB to other financial governing bodies, right? This happened in the last paragraph. This happened in the last paragraph, but it was essentially mentioned by the author, uh, right, to kind of emulate two governing bodies and to see whether success can be attained or not, right? But it was only mentioned briefly, right? It's too specific to be the primary purpose of the paragraph, right? Too specific to be the primary purpose of the paragraph. The author essentially did not write the entire comprehension just to tell us that ECB should emulate two governing bodies, right? uh, D again, look at D. Enumerate several examples of the constantly changing global financial climate. It is talking about global climate, but the passage, the entire comprehension was about Europe. It was clearly about Europe. So why are we mentioning the, the global financial climate here, right? And then see, remember, ask not which of the, see, we have two remaining, right? We have C and E remaining. So when we boil down to such two choices, ask yourself not which of the remaining two choices looks more appealing, but which one looks worse, right? Because when it comes to comprehensions, it is more viable to eliminate options than to look at which is the best. Look at which is worse out of the two, right? We have C and we have E, right? Look at C. Provide support for the theory that Europe's transition to a central bank will have many obstacles. Kind of totally reflects on, the structure that we made, right? That ECB and Euro are the subjects. First, we talked about challenges. Challenges were basically because of diverse countries. Then we talked about how success is possible, though it will be tough, right? So this is going to marry the into the skeleton that we prepared, right? This is totally reflecting the flow that we'd structured. So C looks viable. Let's look at E. Prove that the ECB will never bring about price stability on which its survival so clearly depends. E is extremely negative. If you remember the last paragraph, the author was talking about how it is possible, right? So why will we go for such a negative answer option? And remember, whenever you have such absolute options in your comprehensions, more often than not, they're not the answers, right? Last paragraph express some reasons for optimism, so never in that context does not make any sense. C is the best answer option. All right, so this is how we boil down to answers when it comes to reading comprehension. Let's look at another question. In the passage, the author is primarily concerned with which of the following? This is another general question. Not very specific, a very general question. Again, use the process of elimination. Use POE. Let's look at option A. Comparing two different approaches to resolving a conflict. Now, was there a conflict to resolve in the passage? No, right? So eliminate option A, right? Option B, expressing dismay over a poorly reasoned conclusion. Again, see, option B does not account for the optimism in the last paragraph, right? There was a lot of optimism in the last paragraph. If the paragraph began with the word fortunately, right? So we'll eliminate option B, right? Option C, presenting information and offering different ways to interpret it. Were there different ways to interpretation? There was only one way of interpretation, which was the author's way of interpretation, right? There were no different ways of interpretation, right? So now, again, describing a problem that will not be solved easily. See, the important thing to note here is that you don't have to reread anything in the passage. We know for a fact that there was no policy that the author was talking about or the comprehension was talking about. Where's the policy that option E is referring to? So we eliminate E. D looks like the most viable answer option. Whatever is what describing a problem that will not be solved easily. What is the problem? The problem is implementation of one common currency, which is euro. What is the problem? The problem is ECB's survival chances, right? These were the problems essentially, right? So D in that context becomes very, very viable. And see, again, we did not have to revisit the passage. We know for a fact what the skeleton is. हमने हर पैराग्राफ के बाद समरी बनाई है, हमने पूरे पैसेज की भी समरी बनाई है. So we know for a fact what every general question is kind of referring to, right? So what I'm trying to get at is that if you've summarized the passage well, if you've prepared the structure, the framework properly in your head, you don't have to revisit the comprehension again and again to, browse through the answer options and to look for the best and the most suitable answer, right? Let's look at the third question. Which of the following best describes the organization of the passage? So basically, this is a sample general question pertaining to the structure of the passage. What was the structure like? This would have been slightly easy. Let's look at it now. Again, we don't have to revisit the comprehension for this. If we look at our structure, the summary that we prepared, right? ECB introduced problems, problems because countries are diverse. Then we went to euro, problem with new currency, which is euro, and then we came to the conclusion, which was a positive and optimistic conclusion, right? So we know for a fact that this is the skeleton of the comprehension. Let's look at the options now. Two historical backgrounds are compared and contrasted. Were there any historical backgrounds mentioned? Not at all. Eliminate A. B. Problem is identified, discussed, and resolved. So the idea here is these are kind of incomplete options, right? Because uh, was there any resolution? Was there any resolution in the passage? Right? This is kind of dicey, so let's put it here as maybe. Let's look at all the other options as well. A theory is discussed and evidence is introduced to condemn it. Right. Was there a condemnation that was happening? This does not account for the optimism of the last paragraph. Optimism of last para. Right? It does not account for the optimism of the last paragraph, so we eliminate C. D, again, paradox is described and one side is shown to be more dominant than the other. See, there was no paradox that was mentioned in the passage, right? There was no paradox. Again, this is a totally different concept altogether, so we can eliminate D. E, a debate is introduced and supporting evidence for both sides is presented, right? So if we kind of compare B and E, right? B says a problem is identified. Yes, the problem was identified. Was the problem discussed? Yes, the problem was discussed. But was it resolved? Was there any resolution that was mentioned? No, right? The author said that, you know what, there is scope for optimism. It will be a tough road, but success is possible. But essentially, there was no resolution to the problem, right? So we eliminate B and we go with option E, which says a debate is introduced. What is the debate? Either the ECB will be successful or it will be flop, right? The debate is introduced in the first paragraph itself. Either it will be successful or it will be a flop. Supporting evidence for both sides. Then the author supports the evidence for all the problems or all the obstacles that ECB will face. And then the author talks about how there is scope for optimism and probably it could be a successful endeavor as well. Right? So, supporting evidence for both sides in that context was actually presented. Let's look at another question now. Which of the following best describes the relation of the last paragraph to the whole passage as a whole? This is a slightly easier question. Again, it is a structure based question as to what is the role that the last paragraph is playing to the complete passage as a whole. Right? We are well acquainted with the main idea of the passage by now. We know for a fact what the passage was about, right? So we shouldn't be in trouble here. This is a rather easy question. Again, let's follow the process of elimination and arrive at the best answer option. Option A, it advances an argument to be debated further. Not really. It outlines a process to be re examined again. Uh, does not really make sense. What process was being outlined for re examination? See, it adds some positive points to an otherwise negative outlook, kind of makes sense, right? The entire passage, the author was very pessimistic. In the last paragraph, the author was slightly optimistic. The author was slightly positive about the chances, and the author said for a fact that these are a few steps you can take uh, to kind of try and be successful, but that it will be a tough road, right? So let's look at D. It reinforces a theory that is not easily disproved. Was there a theory that was mentioned in the last paragraph? Not really, right? So we eliminate D. It poses a question that as yet has no answer. There was no question that was posed in the last paragraph, so we can eliminate option E as well. The only viable option here is option C, that there are some positive points to an otherwise totally negative outlook. Let's look at another question. The author's attitude toward the success of the ECB can be best described as what? So this is what? This is a sample tone question, right? This is again a very general question. Thus far, you guys, we've only been catering to general questions. This is a very sample tone question, right? Very straightforward. Tone questions are very straightforward. Either they are right on or they are way off. And tone questions are not very often asked when it comes to comprehensions because they're very easy, right? Because you can, in order for there to be conclusion, the idea is out of these five, four are clearly incorrect, right? So similarly, when it comes to tone questions, there's not much confusion because we know for a fact that there's only one right answer, right? Otherwise, why would the question be even there, right? Was the author indifferent? If the author would have been indifferent, the author would not have written the passage, right? So we eliminate option A. Clearly the author was expressing his own viewpoints, and if the author were indifferent, the author would not be writing the passage, right? Was the author hostile? The author was not hostile because we know for a fact that in the last paragraph the author became very optimistic, the author was positive, right? So the author couldn't have been hostile. Again, amusement and admiration. These are also incorrect because, see, when you look at the passage, when you go back to the structure of the passage, we've already discussed what the flow is like, what the structure was like, what the basic skeleton is, what was the purpose, what was the main idea, right? So, throughout the passage, most of the evidence is it steers us to think that ECB won't make it, or that for ECB to be successful there will be a lot of difficulty, right? So that basically expresses skepticism of the author, that you know what, it can be successful but by a long shot, right? So we've basically now solved five very general questions when it comes to the reading comprehension portions of the exam. Now let's start with some very specific questions. The author most probably mentions the Bundesbank in order to do what? Right now we are beginning with specific questions. Thus far we've only been catering to general questions. Now we'll come to specific questions. Specific questions, more often than not, are retrieval questions. So what this means is that you have to retrieve information in the passage, or you have to search for information in the passage. So they cover a very small portion of the text from within the comprehension, right? Specific questions, they kind of take on many forms as well, as each question refers to a very specific point made within the comprehension. And the quick summary that we made, it is enough for general questions, but for specific questions quite often we have to revisit the comprehension, right? But because we know what the summary is of every paragraph, we know the right spot to hit if we understood the meaning, right? That is a big plus of kind of noting down the summary of every paragraph, so that we know which spot to hit, which paragraph to go to basically just look for an answer to the very question that we are stuck on. So, as soon as we identify a specific question, the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is, where did I read it? Right? Uh, did where did I read that? Specific question, where did I read that? Right. So, for example, when you look at this question, the author most probably mentions the Bundesbank. We know Bundesbank here is the keyword. So, it works well to identify keywords when it comes to our specific questions. right? Keywords. Bundesbank here is a clear keyword. We know for a fact that the last paragraph carried the word Bundesbank, right? There are two extraordinary financial models to study and replicate: the German Bundesbank and America's Federal Reserve Board, right? So Bundesbank here is kind of the keyword, right? Fortunately for the ECB's architect, there are two extraordinary models to study and replicate, right? Let's go back to the question now. Yeah. Suggest an alternate composition of no. They were trying to say that we can emulate Bundesbank to be successful. Compare its fiscal policies? No. Provide an example to which ECB will never measure up. Again, a very extreme answer option. Why will we never measure up to it? Right? So we eliminate C and indicate that there are other established fiscal entities for ECB to emulate. A clear answer, right? From the very first line of that paragraph, we could have zeroed in on this. Urge the German government to ease restrictions? Not really, right? So, the idea being, look for the keyword. From the keyword, we know for a fact which paragraph to go to because we've summarized the passage already. Next question. The passage clearly implies. Implies means this is an inference question. This is a very clear inference question. So inference means that out of these five, we have five options. Out of these five, one has to be true. So ask yourself which option is true based on the passage. Which option has to be true? This is what we have to ask ourselves. Now, this is another type of question that you can expect in your reading comprehension. Rather, you can be fairly certain that you'll get an inference question. In implication or inference, right? Both mean the same, and you'll definitely get one, right? Because this is like a favorite when it comes to the reading comprehension questions, right? Examiners make sure that they ask us inference or implication questions because a lot of people get this wrong, right? A lot of people don't really understand what the passage was trying to tell us, and the main focus is always on solving questions, right? So inference, you will be able to get right only when you've understood the passage properly. Right. So let's consider each option individually. Option A, uh, countries whose economies are depressed by the price wars following the arrival of the euro will eventually rebound and prosper, right? Uh, let's go back to the fourth paragraph, right? This is the fourth paragraph, right? Now, what does this say? Many countries will not recover from the situation in the short term, right? So we know for a fact we can eliminate option A, right? That the countries will eventually rebound and prosper. That is not what the author was saying, right? We don't know what will happen eventually. Rather, the author said we don't know what will happen eventually. This is what will happen in the short term, that they will suffer a lot, right? When we look at option B, the average German or Italian has more disposable income than does the average Portuguese or Spaniard, right? Uh, Again, this is basically a decoy, right? They know for a fact that we know these countries, these nationalities were mentioned in the paragraph, but they were comparing personal incomes of Spain and Portugal, right? The idea is that these are different bits of data, right? Germans and Italians were above average. Do we know that the average income, uh, has the average German or Italian has more disposable income than does the average Portuguese or Spaniard? The It seems to make sense, but when you look at what the comprehension was saying, how do I put it? It's right. But most price differentials derive from seemingly immutable standards of living. Personal incomes in Spain and Portugal are well below the average. This is what they are saying, right? But are they telling us anything about, right? The average cost of a pair of blue jeans is 34% higher in Germany than it is in Italy, right? So they are basically mentioning these nationalities, these countries in different contexts. So how can you compare disposable income of Germany and Italy when it is not mentioned in the paragraph only, right? So it is one of those options that seems to make sense, right? But does not really fit in, right? Does not really fit in. See, were it not for the Maastricht Treaty, the ECB would never have come about. See, it is again an equally flawed answer option because Maastricht Treaty was mentioned, yes, but the context in which Maastricht Treaty was mentioned was very very different, right? ECB and Maastricht Treaty are related, but we can't infer from the passage that one wouldn't have happened without the other, right? So that is why we can eliminate option C as well. D. Arrival of the euro has not solved the problems of price disparity in Europe. Now, D kind of makes sense here, right? We know for a fact that after euro was introduced, it did not really solve uh, the problems. Why? Because let's look at this. Uh, they've done well, but now that Europe has adopted one currency, the euro, Europeans are more likely to seek out best price. So we know for a fact that they will seek out best price, which is why depressed localized economies of scale is something that the author mentioned as a concern, right? So it did not really solve the problem of price differential because people still wanted to haggle and seek out the best price, right? Kind of makes sense. Let's look at E. Governing council may have to alter its plan of equal representation to account for the contributions of each country to Europe's overall GDP. Again, the idea is that when it comes to E, it is just plain wrong, right? Because why? Because it's never mentioned in the paragraph. The last paragraph was talking about governing council, but the last paragraph was not really saying this. It talks about how current representation, it talks about the current representative system, but there's no kind of reference to what the future plans might look like. There's no reference to that, so that is why we can eliminate option E altogether, right? I'll take you back to the last paragraph, right? It talks about the current representation, right? uh, right here, regardless of its population or size of the GDP, will be represented equally in the ECB's governing council, which will dictate the policies that the various national banks will implement. So E is again plain wrong. So this is what typically happens when it comes to inference questions. They ask you about a lot of things. They give you a lot of decoys which seem like the correct answers because those things were mentioned in the passage, but you have to make sure that you're understanding the context to be able to arrive at the correct answer. The passage suggests that the author believes which of the following, right? So basically what they're asking you here is, uh, does the author agree? Does the author agree is what they're asking you. Again, shoot them down one by one. Follow the process of elimination, shoot them down one by one. Option A, stabilizing the euro with global currency markets. Global currency markets is not mentioned in the paragraph. We'll eliminate A, right? The cultures of various European countries will begin to grow together soon after the euro completely supplants all the separate currencies that are now in use. Uh, Prospect of European cultures growing together was not mentioned in the passage. We eliminate B. C. Multiple factors will prevent price stability from happening anytime soon, and it will probably won't happen at all. Again, it will probably won't happen at all. Again, this is a very negative answer option, right? This is a very negative answer option. But let's look at whether it is the most viable, because it says price stability will not happen, and we want to, the passage is asking what the author believes in, right? If you look at the second paragraph, it begins with that the pessimism is valid, is what the author was trying to get at, right? So I'll still put this on the back burner and see if I have a better answer option, even though I think that it is slightly negative. Let's look at D. Bundesbank should assume all financial responsibilities for the European Bank until the ECB becomes fully operational. Again, uh, the author mentioned Bundesbank, right? But the author said that this is bank that we should try and emulate, right? Not something that should completely be taking over, right? So we eliminate D there. The GDP of a nation should determine the number of delegates that the nation sends in. Uh, Again, GDP determining the number of delegates. I think every country would have the same number of delegates, is what they were saying. Each country, regardless of its population or size of GDP, will be represented equally in the governing council, right? So, representation was supposed to be equal, so we can eliminate E as well. And we'll go with C because C is expressing, even though it is negative, but it is expressing the author's skepticism, right? The skepticism, the pessimism was evident throughout, even though in the end the author said that you might be successful as well, but the author himself was very pessimistic and skeptic. That is why C looks to be the most viable answer option uh, within the five options that we have, among the five options that we have. Let's go look at the last one. Which of the following, if true, would most clearly weaken the chances of the ECB's survival? Now, these are the reasoning questions. Reasoning question. Reasoning questions will basically give you weakening, or reasoning questions will give you strengthening, or reasoning questions will give you, assumption questions, right? These are the type of reasoning questions that you can expect in your comprehensions. Now, a very important thing to note is that when it comes to reasoning questions, a lot of the options are out of scope, right? And for example, this is a weaken question, so we could have an option that strengthens the basically that strengthens the chances of ECB's survival instead of weakening it. right? So these are the kind of decoys that we can expect when it comes to reasoning questions, right? So let's look at all the options one by one, right? And let's start with option E, right? Let's kind of go the other way around here. Let's start with E. The term of service for each member of ECB's governing board is only 3 years. Uh, it See again, we know the plans of ECB? Do we know anything about the term of service? Do we have any context there? It is again irrelevant, right? Because we don't know the term there. We That is not something that was discussed in the passage, so we can eliminate E, right? Let's look at D. As prices fall in Russia, which is not part of the EU, commercial entities will in Europe will buy Russian raw materials in large quantities. Again, it is kind of out of the scope, because as they are saying, Russia is not in EU, right? Russia is beyond the jurisdiction of EU, beyond the jurisdiction where we are using euro as the common currency, so it is irrelevant. So we eliminate D. C. Some of the legislation that is necessary for price reform will take years to put into effect. uh, See, the issue is whether it will succeed or not, not the kind of, or not the amount of time it will take for it to succeed or fail, right? Even if it take years, that is all right, just that we need to know whether it will succeed or it will fail. Legislation, basically, what is the legislation? The legislation is implementation of euro across all countries as common currency, right? So we are concerned about whether it will be successful or it will be a failure. We're not concerned about the time it will take, right? So that is why we'll eliminate option C in that context. Option B. Now, option B is basically talking about the prices for most cosmetics in Belgium and the Netherlands are virtually identical. If the prices are identical, see, we are looking for a negative point. B is giving us a positive idea that, comparable prices in separate countries, they exist, right? It is a small example, but it supports the idea, right? What do we want? We want to weaken the idea. Again, B is a strengthening option. It is strengthening instead of weakening, right? So that is why we'll eliminate B as well. Only A seems to make sense, that Federal Reserve Board governors have no experience with having to reconcile various languages and cultures into their financial policies, right? Remember, the author mentioned how we can emulate the Federal Reserve Board, or how we can emulate the German Bundesbank, right? If we want to emulate these, we have to study and replicate these. And if Fed has no experience in dealing with many cultures and languages, right, and ECB needs those that kind of experience, because they mentioned how the European countries are very diverse, then the Federal Reserve Board in that context isn't exactly the best model for us to replicate, is it? If it does not have experience, then why are we replicating it? That is why it weakens uh, the chances of ECB's survival, right? So A in that context becomes the best possible answer for us, right? So broadly speaking, these are we've covered all categories of questions that you could perhaps come across, right? We've covered general questions, which had tone questions, structure questions, main idea questions, primary purpose questions, right? We covered all those general questions. Then we covered specific questions wherein we have to retrieve or search and find information from within the comprehension, right? Then we covered inference questions. Then we covered reasoning questions. So broadly speaking, these are all the kind of questions that you can expect in your comprehension, and this is an exhaustive list. There is nothing more to it. This is it, right? If you have a question when it comes to comprehension, it is one of these questions, right? Uh, Also, I hope you follow my advice of summarizing every paragraph, and then towards the end, after you've read every paragraph, summarizing the entire comprehension. Now, today we took time, right? But when it comes to the questions that you'll be solving in your exam, I don't want you be taking that long. What I want you to do is read a paragraph in 3 to 4 words, summarize that paragraph, then go on to the next one, summarize the next one, and so on and so forth. And once you're done with the entire passage, go through the summaries of each paragraph, and your mind will form a blueprint. Your mind will form a framework as to what the entire comprehension was about, and it helps. It definitely helps. जनरल क्वेश्चंस के लिए तो ये सफिशिएंट चीज है, तुम्हें दोबारा कॉम्प्रिहेंशन में जाने की जरूरत भी नहीं है. बट व्हेन इट कम्स टू स्पेसिफिक क्वेश्चंस, you might need to visit. What summarizing every paragraph does is that after you read those specific questions, you will know exactly which paragraph to go to, because you have that summary of paragraph with you. So you know you have to visit that particular paragraph. It is not in paragraph 1, it is in paragraph 3, right? These are the kind of things that we really, really need to know, and can shorten the amount of time we take when it comes to solving these questions. All right. So this is pretty much it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you had fun. I'll see you again, right? I'll see you again. Till then, stay safe, stay strong. Bye bye.